I know my country, I know go lie. Naim and me go yap till I die. Ah! I love my country, I know go lie. Now inside I go live and die. When he turn me so, I twist and so. He push me, I push him, I know go.
Wole Soyinka is a man much misunderstood, and perhaps that's because he's maybe two different kinds of personalities. He's, to people who are close to him, very warm, very friendly, very unassuming. For those who don't know him, people whom he's not close to, he tends to have a different image, a standoffish image, somebody who's difficult to get close to.
I have a dream. Je fais un rêve. Un jour, le principal souci de l'homme sera de nourrir son esprit. Le temps des grands et petits profits, des petits et des grands égoïsmes seront révolus. Il ne nous restera plus à assouvir que notre faim de compréhension et de culture. Je rêve, mais il faudra bien qu'un jour cela soit. L'homme a vécu dans des cavernes, des huttes, des villages, des pays, des nations, et aujourd'hui, nous prenons conscience d'habiter une planète. Chaque homme est devenu le proche voisin de chaque homme. L'humanité est une affaire de bon voisinage. Il nous reste à élargir notre champ de conscience à l'échelle de la planète. Pour cela, il est nécessaire que tout homme ait non seulement les moyens de vivre, mais encore ceux de penser par lui-même. Qu'on lui reconnaisse le droit d'accès à la connaissance et aussi celui de cultiver sa propre culture. Car ce n'est pas d'une vision unique dont cette planète a besoin, mais d'un regard riche de toutes les différences, de toutes les aspirations, de tous les souvenirs.
When I left the University of Ife, where I was teaching in 1985, of course, I had to have somewhere to put my head. So I began thinking of a small place in my old town, Abeokuta. As the construction went on, I thought of expanding it and making it a kind of artist's retreat. There is a bit of bush around, but we're not really far from Abeokuta. In fact, this is part of Abeokuta. But I have picked one of the most extreme points of the town because the whole idea is to get away from everything and everybody, but while at the same time keeping physical touch with the rest of the town. So it is in Abeokuta, yes. Abeokuta was a city of rocks, still is, rocks and woods interspersed with rocks. So the rocks were the predominant kind of nature image in Abeokuta. I was born here, brought up in Ake. Ake is almost, well, not quite on the other side. From here, it's about halfway through the town of Abeokuta. That's where I was raised. Well, it's where it all began. These are the playgrounds of one's childhood, all this area. They used to have whitewashed stones, but all that seems to have changed. It's all bare. It's impossible to see now because it's been demolished. But the pastor whom I described, the canon whom I described in Ake, his house used to be over there, but the prelate's domain was that church over there, St. Peter's Church. Now, this is the primary school where I spent most of the time. It's the school bell, one of my favorite characters. In my conception, it was always related to that church. In fact, I think I described it in Ake as the infant son, infant child of that very distant parent. The whole place was like a family, both the animate objects and the inanimate objects, including even these playing fields, which have changed now. Now, that, of course, was the dominant object in the entire compound. That mass of boulders was the boss of everything. It dominated the entire space here. It was patriarch and matriarch for all the children. Playground, all the hollows, the combs, climbing on the backs of the rocks, trying to be as sure-footed as those goats over there. Now, this, of course, is Jonas, if you haven't guessed, and if you've read Ake, The Years of Childhood. The whale, I know it was the whale who swallowed the prophet Jonah, but in my view at the time, this was the whale, Jonah. And somebody's been chopping off the head, some nasty people, but it still retains the same shape. The main attraction was its placidity. One could just lie on the back all day. I was fascinated by the oval pools. Who made them, we didn't know, but who must have come from somewhere in the skies and just dug out these holes specially for us to knead clay in. This building, that's where I started my schooling, the infant section of St. Peter's School. I followed my sister to school very early, before I was even 3. And according to my teacher, who enjoys telling the story, that's where I signaled my intention to soak up all possible knowledge by soaking all his books in my pee. I had fallen asleep on his table. Anyway, after that very determined signal to the world, the teacher had no option but to let me stay on and continue my schooling with other children who were far older than I was. The classes were not demarcated by any walls, just different classes grouped there in that alcove over there. Occasionally, a mat partition, and that was all. So you had times table ringing here, you have Bible recitation ringing over there, you have maybe some hygienic class over there, and then you have the usual squalling and fighting among children, all of it, everything together. And somehow things did get learned. In Ake, I tried to reconstruct everything through my eyes as a child. Ishara is my paternal village. Used to be a village, now it's a town, a small town. It's a very different earth from Ake, my first childhood biography. In fact, Ishara was, in a sense, created by Ake after I tried to recapture, to retrieve that portion of my existence which has vanished or which is vanishing. I found my thoughts turning more and more to Ishara. Ishara is part of my childhood, except that I do not appear in it. It really is more the story, I describe it a voyage around Essay, Essay being my father. A subtitle I borrowed from John Mortimer's play, which he wrote about his father. But I liked very much the sound of it, a voyage around one's father. So it doesn't pretend to be totally factual, but it's based on facts. The real names there. I tried now to approach that period, and especially the town of Ishara, with far more mature sensibility. This time I tried to listen to the voices which they used among themselves, to recollect those voices, that perspective on life, on politics, the colonial period, which is very important to them. I didn't realize what colonialism was when I was that young. All I knew was that we dressed up in our little starched shorts and shirts and marched on Empire Day, and unknowing to ourselves, we sang very proudly, not knowing that we were laughing at ourselves. We sang the praises of Queen Victoria and how she was the great liberator of black people. Oh, what a disgrace. I didn't live so much in Ishara when I was a child. It was really my father's town. So I became fascinated by his world, his friends, his intellectual circle. And as I browsed through some of his cockroach and termite-eaten letters, correspondence, I found myself compelled to recreate that atmosphere, which was so peculiarly his and his friends. The Odem of Ishara, the king, a very fascinating political activist who became a king who seemed, on the one hand, to step backwards from a kind of modern political. He was a trade unionist, you know, he was a secretary of a trade union in Lagos, a real confrontational being against the colonial forces. And yet he accepted to become the Odemo of Ishara. And I found myself trying to probe into the kind of commitment of this man to the betterment of his people, the levels, the many levels, in fact, things which we take for granted. You know, it's so glib to talk about feudalist structure, to talk about a modern political approach, but ultimately it is the people. So this is how Ishara came about. I wanted to see the process, the interaction of these people, their commitment to this little corner of Nigeria called Ishara. So it's not really my story, it's my father's story. I fictionalized. I mean, I wasn't there. Well, I was, but I wasn't. I mean, I wasn't. I only eavesdropped on their conversations with my own childlike mind, and eavesdropped on his correspondence after his death. So it's I have to fictionalize some of the events there, but of course they are all based on things which actually happened. And right now, in fact, a new Odemo of Ishara has just been selected, and I think he'll be enthroned probably, I don't know the date, probably about the same time as that book will be published in Nigeria. So it's quite a beautiful cycle for here anyway. I've always been equally moved both by the immediate social, physical content of my existence, as well as by the more intuitive mythological aspects. My first publication, Idore, for instance, was very much it was a mixture, even though it's true, the long poem, Idore itself, which is set on a mystical experience.
Low beneath rock shields, home of the Iron One, the sun had built a fire within Earth's heartstone. Flames in fever fits ran in rock fissures, and hill surfaces were all aglow with Earth's transparency. Orishanla, Oromila, Ishu, Ifa were all assembled, defeated in the quest to fraternize with man. Wordlessly he rose, sought knowledge in the hills. Ogun, the lone one, saw it all, the secret veins of matter and the circling loads. Shango's spent thunderbolt served him a hammerhead. His fingers touched earth core, and it yielded. To think, a mere plague of finite chaos stood between the gods and man. He made a mesh of elements from stone of fire in earth fruit, the womb of energies. He made an anvil of the peaks and kneaded red clay for his mold. In his hand the weapon gleamed, born of the primal mechanic. If poetry can be enjoyed in translation, does it mean it can only be enjoyed in
what you might call a secondary move translation. Somebody writes the poem, another person translates it. Or is that possible for there to be a kind of, I call it the fusion of the two processes? An automatic translation which goes on in the mind, in the creative box, that mysterious creative box in every individual, in which even if concepts begin in one's own language, those concepts are not automatically given flesh in the material of a different language. And I find that as a creator, I have no problem at all. And I receive a double assurance in this because when I write plays, very often the lyrics of the songs I use come out first in Yoruba. This seems to be almost standard. And so if, on the other hand, an experience, whether of a high-powered emotion, if that happens to come out easily without any effort on my part, without my even thinking, have I thought in English? Did I receive the first intimation, the first transmission of the experience, the exterior stimulus, without asking myself, did it come in English? Did it come in Yoruba? If, however, what comes out is in English, it means I'm very much at home within that language. It's no effort. And so it comes out, it's written down in English. If it comes out in Yoruba, fine. If it comes out in English, all right. There's also that political condition in which we find ourselves in Africa, having been heirs to more than one language. And I think we should absolutely celebrate in our work even this very heritage of dual, triple, no matter how many languages. And I think many, many Nigerian and African writers, poets, feel the same. We have very many national languages in Africa. Am I to be cut off from the poetry of Diana, from Kofi Awuno, even from within in Nigeria, from the poetry of Harry Garuba, for instance, who mostly speaks Hausa. I enjoy the lyrics of the poetry of the Yoruba writers, the very densely textured, poetic prose of Dio Fagnoa, whom I've translated into English also. How do I communicate with a Mozambican? Should I not share even his or her most intimate experiences? The passionate expression which receives such concision in that tight medium which we call poetry. In languages like the Yoruba, for instance, which is a very rich, very metaphorical, densely metaphorical language, the prose, the English prose, when it is used, because it reflects very much Yoruba prose, tends to be very, very poetic. Threepenny Opera, I think, was really written for Nigeria. This time, not just for the Yoruba world, but Threepenny Opera. If you read the Nigerian newspapers today, whether you're thinking of Gay's original Beggar's Opera, you're thinking of Brecht's Threepenny Opera, that play is just a play for the Nigerian times. And it's one of the adaptations I enjoyed most, both in the writing and in the producing, the directing, because the areas of improvisation were enormous. Euripides, the play which I adapted, in particular the Bacchae, is very much at the heart of Yoruba mythology, Yoruba worldview. It's related to Ogun, for instance. The idea of ecstatic union versus rather prudish reason, state, shall we say, the strictures of state versus the sense of community, the sense of the communion. All this is implicit, it's very much embedded in the rites, the rituals of Ogun. And so Dionysus, for me, became a twin brother to Ogun, Death and the King's Horseman. Remember, it was a colonial officer who prevented the death of the King's Horseman. It was based on a real story, which took place in the colonial days. I changed certain
details of it, of course. But what fascinated me about the story when I first heard it was the attitude, the exemplification of a certain unique attitude to death. It's not something you run into so much these days, where somebody takes on the burden of death from someone else. When one is so totally enmeshed in this metaphysical worldview, however reactionary it may seem to us today, that somebody must die when the king dies. But it's not just a question of a feudal structure alone, you know. It has to do with a sense, a kind of conception of harmony within the community, the cleaning out of a particular phase in a people's development. And that phase is embodied by the king and by his kingsmen. It is not a custom which I subscribe to. You know, if I were the king's horseman, I would have run, you know, after having a great time, but I wouldn't stay around to be mocked and jeered at. So when he failed to accompany the king to commit suicide, almost by willpower, the sun came. And he came home to bury his father, thinking he would have committed suicide, to accompany the king, was shocked to find his father still alive, and committed suicide. It happened here in Nigeria. So it's yet another view which raises the question, what actually is death? What's the meaning of life? What's the meaning of honor? Is honor relative? Does it depend only on situations, circumstances which are approved by, let us say, modern society, or is honor absolute? In other words, if you have a commitment, if you've given your word, if the conditions of your entire existence in life leads towards one point, which is to kill yourself, do you have a right to say, as a result of superior knowledge, you will now at the last moment deny it? These are questions, and that's one of the things I like about that story. And about the question of my collecting sculptures, I find that directing a play is really like sculpting in space, mobile from a sculpture, sculpting with human beings. I'm not talking now about the interpretation of the language, the message, if you like. I'm talking about the particular medium, the mise en scène, in which one interprets or annotates a line of poetry by the sheer movement on stage. It's for me the most rewarding aspects of directing on stage. I cannot wait to get beyond the problems of textual interpretation, which is so essential, which you must sit down, make sure every actor understands what he's saying and why he's saying it. And then you move on to breathe life into that understanding, to that purely intellectual approach to a text.
That's it. So, tó bá ti kà yẹn tán, káwọn onílù gbé. Ṣé bẹ́ẹ̀? Ẹ̀yin ìyàwó náà, ó yá, ẹ kíjó mọ́lẹ̀, ó yá láyé. Èmi ni máa sọ fún ẹ ìgbà wo ni. Ó lè wà pẹ̀lú wọn, ìwọ ni messenger. Bó kí ló wà ń bẹ̀? Ó bọ́ sí ọ̀hún. Satellite ló bá wa.
Yoruba theatre is one of the richest in all of Africa. You know, it's not because I'm a Yoruba, but I did go into the study of African theatre. Drove around quite a bit, all over the continent, especially West Africa. And I think that the theatre of the Yoruba is one of the most profound.
Kábíyèsí Ọ̀rúnmìlà, kí bó ṣe máa kí kábíyèsí. Ó kàn lè dé kankan náà pépà fún bẹ ní pé odi ní ẹ̀. Wá kí bó fẹ́ kó ṣe bí ìgbà. Ká sọ pé wọ́n fi iṣẹ́ rán ẹ sí Ọ̀ọ̀ni. Tí a kàn dọ̀bálẹ̀ wálé náà. Ọ̀rúnmìlà ju Ọ̀ọ̀ni lọ.
theater is both secular and a spiritual event. I mean, it splits in very many branches. For instance, when you speak of catharsis, catharsis has its origins in what you might call the theater of trance. The psychological experience, the psychological residuum is more or less the same, at least it's within the same family of human responses, in the effect of the trance, coming out of a trance, and being part of a powerful tragic drama, the effect on the individual afterwards. So it's a fluid space between the two. No, I don't insist on the total secularization of theater. I've watched theater, religious theater, which I found very, very moving. Nobody can deny the powerful impact of passion plays, for instance. If you witness Peter Brook's Mahabharata, or whatever it is, you know, this long epic thing, this Indian epic, it's a very moving experience. A bit too long, I think, but it's a moving spiritual experience. Let me move to a concrete example. When I directed Death and the King's Horseman, both in Chicago and in New York, yes, it was a secular experience, secular exercise, but do you know how often my actresses, some of my actresses and some actors were possessed during the scene of the transition of the King's Horseman? I mean, they had to be helped off the stage several nights. And some of the audience, too, were, moved almost to the point of trance. One woman I remember was escorted out of the theater. She couldn't take it anymore. Now, where does the bound of secularity and the spiritual, metaphysical experience, where does one find the border? There's such a variety of plays. You don't always go for the plays in which your actors might get into trances. I would add another example, coming back to Nigeria, now that you mention Nigeria. When I directed the J.P. Clark's Song of a Goat, and we came to that ritual moment where the goat is severed. The head is severed from the goat for the ritual cleansing of for the moment of the purpose of revelation of some filth within the clan. There was a night which everybody who took part in that play remembered vividly, with awe and terror. And that was when something happened in which the actors on stage and the actresses were virtually moved beyond the border of distancing. And the fellow who played the threatened actor, the one who was menaced, he's now an ambassador, by the way. When he escaped from that stage, he didn't stop in the dressing room as usual. He just kept running all the way to Agodi, because he was convinced that the person playing his elder brother was really going to cut off his head. He said he looked into the eyes and he leapt into the dressing room, charged through the window, and he didn't stop running until he got to Agodi. He didn't even stop to pick up his car. Now, things like that happen in theater, and they're unpredictable moments.
You have a big drainage problem.
Naturally. In fact, it's the first thing we tackled before beginning work on the structure itself. Because, as you see, the rains can be very, very heavy. So we had to build drainages, replan some of the unfortunate areas which have been denuded of the natural vegetation.
All the water goes in the pond that you have here?
Yes, I'll show you that in a moment. It used to be a very tiny trickle just along there, so I have to dig all of that. I created that semi-dam there gives a sense of importance to the building, a dam of its own kind of thing.
This is your little theater.
Rehearsal space, or like open-air rehearsal space, and exhibition room, reading room. This is the stage, miniature stage. It's not quite ready, the foundation is not quite ready.
It isn't.
But a project like this, the translation of the Holy Book of Ifa, is very much the kind of projects which the foundation intends to be involved in very seriously.
This is good news. Thank you.
It's, well, obviously there are going to be problems. Yoruba ijinle, Jigba, Lele, Bishe, Dio Fagunwa. But obviously it's the more reason why it needs to be done. I don't know if you're as moved as I usually am by the arrogance of Christianity and Islam, their sort of monopolistic claims to religious truth. For me, they are just aspects of whatever truth is. And the kind of permanent denigration of other religions, especially African traditional religions, simply because many of these religions do not have a corpus of scriptures, scriptural texts. I mean, we do have them,
yes,
but in terms of being translated, being accessible to those who do not actually speak Yoruba, for me, any mission which is undertaken to correct that is most essential. It's a continuation, let us say, of the kind of thing we tried to do in the 60s when we started the Mbari Writers Association. This one will be far more tranquil kind of atmosphere. If you like to say that was the spring of Nigerian collective creativity, this will be a kind of autumnal program, rather than not too much ferment, not too great activity. It doesn't mean that it'll be totally tranquil. For instance, I expect we might have some musicians there who would want to try out some compositions of theirs. There will, of course, be rehearsals. You've seen the little amphitheater where things can be tried out, but such actors would not actually live there. They'll be brought from town. It's really for writing, thinking out projects. And it will not be just for artists. I am making a provision that there should be either a technologist or a scientist who just wants to come and work out a theorem or the other, or find the final cure for AIDS, while he's sitting down there. As long as it doesn't spread any dangerous virus around, he'll be welcome, that kind of thing. And we will have to bring some other scholars into it.
Yes.
Have you thought of a few names?
I didn't think of any particular scholar in terms of the Western trained scholar, because they may not be suited to this kind of an occupation.
The universities, first of all, are dead in terms of their being universities, what universities were here, what they should be. It's true that the majority of the writers that we know today as contemporary writers, poets, dramatists, did go through the university phase. But we met outside universities. And Mbari was certainly one of the most fertile centers of creativity. We interacted with people like Ogunmola, Ogunde, who never went to university. Drew Ladipo, for instance. We did his plays. We ran repertory sessions with plays in English and plays in the indigenous languages. The universities were good teaching and teething places in terms of extension of one's horizon and so on, but I think it's true to say that a lot of creative activity took place outside the university walls. First of all, there were too many too fast. So there was not enough teaching, really trained and qualified teaching talent and dedicated to go around. So there was a rise of mediocrities. But most important of all, the universities could still have survived that. But then the universities became politicized. The vice-chancellors became very nakedly the creatures of political interest, political powers. And of course, the really bad ones, tended to surround themselves with mediocrities to safeguard their position. So the kind of crop which we received in the universities were literally half-baked products, not yet ready to enter the university. In fact, this is one of the reasons why I quit the university in 1985 and just moved to Abeokuta. I felt I was deceiving the whole university idea.
Out of a class of about 30, if I found 3 or 4 to whom I could really respond the way I used to in the 60s and the early 70s, I counted myself very, very lucky. So it became, I was utilizing, shall we say, about 10 times as much energy to achieve, let us say, a certain quantity of result or quality of result as I used to some years ago. So I left. And I'm afraid this story is the downhill. It's a downhill story of universities. And I think most of the creativity today is definitely going on outside universities. And by that, I mean not merely in the humanities, in the sciences. If you really want to see the productive sectors in technology in Nigeria today, you go to little laboratories as yet unaccepted. The research work going on in electronics, maybe exceptions are universities like ASUTEC, which really is doing some marvelous work. But the universities, those so-called former bastions of intellectualism in this country, I'm afraid, have gone down.
He was one of the first people to establish this place, the Department of Theatre Arts. Unfortunately, he didn't stay long before he was imprisoned by the government then. And when he came out, he didn't stay long either before leaving on exile. The Gowon government had put him in prison during the Nigerian Civil War. But the little time he did spend here, he was able to leave some landmarks from which we have benefited. His approach to directing, people who normally speak Yoruba, for example, farmers from the interior rural areas, how do you put them on stage speaking English? To do this and to make it convincing, Soyinka worked out a style which has become the paradigm, which has become the model, which we have all since been using. So that's one in the sense of the structures of the plays, which we have benefited from. The other also is in the mechanics of performance, the mechanics, the use of music, of dance, spectacle, of our own folklore, the world of our fables, which he has also been able to exploit in this place in order to create what is distinctively an African theater.
Well, guerrilla theater is, of course, a very different kettle of fish, and it's one of the most exciting media to work in because it changes all the time. It's mostly improvisation in all the various media, of course, song, dance, mime, text, dialogue, and so on. And when I was in Ife, we used it very effectively. Oh yeah, that's what I call my shotgun theater. You just load, aim, fire, and run sometimes. Once I remember we sent a team to Lagos during the civilian days. That was in the period of the rice scandal, which cost this country billions, literally billions of naira. And we did the sketch just outside the premises of the House of Assembly. And after that, the actors loaded onto the, against the door, the entrance to the House of Assembly, fake sacks of rice just stuffed with paper. They were invited in for questioning by the police in there, but they just said what they came to do, and they were released. In the early 60s, it was even greater fun because the members were young, they were very adventurous. It was a new form of theater at the time, and it really charged their creative instincts to the uttermost. It was really great.
Put time for there. Oh yeah, push the motor. No.
At the moment, they are involved in actually writing sketches for road safety.
Oh yeah, can't take the motor. Can't take the...
They take the sketches to motor parks. Then after maybe illustrating some aspect of bad conduct, dangerous conduct on the part of drivers, then engage in conversations, exchange with the drivers.
I'm in a hell of a hurry.
No worry. Shebi don't agree, say you go pay 20 naira. But not to airport we dey go.
Yes, please hurry.
And I say no worry. Then say soup wey sweet.
Please watch how you drive.
Don't worry.
I cannot afford any delay, you know. For instance, if a policeman had seen you reversing on the highway, he would have arrested you.
Don't worry. Not till today I don't let drive for this Lagos.
Good. Just be careful.
Me, I dey careful. But I not be swear, boy. Shebi the light see there for amber. Before the light turn to red. Zoom. See, I don't go. I beg, help me look. You see any policeman?
No. Why?
This motor they do smell for road. I won't cross the sideway.
Well, it's your car. No insult meant. I was only trying to tell you where you were wrong.
You were
That's
more.
what I was doing.
Just left me alone, make her drive my motor they go.
Have mercy. What is this? Goodness. I just must fly. Here, take your 40 naira. I will walk until I bypass this jam, then hop into the next vehicle. You're on your own now. Go break your neck and see if I care.
Thank you, CC Parisi. We not cool for and sometimes it be like some people they hard cocoa for inside something. Okay? Why can't they stop now? They go now.
Why are they stopped? I have stopped because I have reached my house. And why have you been following me? You're under arrest. Shut up. I'm a colonel in the army, and I think you're an armed robber.
Moku.
You're under arrest.
You have people, for instance, the children die of leukemia, or a beloved one, a wife, dies of cancer, and what do? They give all their money and all their time to the Cancer Research Institute or to the Leukemia Research Institute, looking for a solution so that other people's children and relations will not die of the same disease. I've lost many students, many colleagues, many relations, people really very, very close to me, and so I have an obsession about safety on the road. I'm not a government official. I don't have a government office. I don't receive any form of remuneration, any pay, nothing at all. I'm not an executive officer. I just utilize the experience which we had when I was in Oyo State at Ife University, when I started the first ever road safety corps on the entire continent of Africa. So I utilize the same research knowledge, understanding of the habits of the country. And it's other people who do the actual work. I'm just a policy maker and an inspiration, and that's the most important thing. In fact, my ambition is this, that we cut out the entire police aspect of the work, because there has to be punishment. If people don't learn, if people refuse to learn, they have to be punished. You've driven on Nigerian roads before. You know very well that the feeling you have all the time is that somebody is trying to kill you. Somebody you don't know, you've never seen before, you never met in your life, against whom you've committed no offense. When you drive, every few kilometers, somebody has just made an attempt to kill you. And sometimes, unfortunately, they succeed. Self-defense is not against the law. And what we're doing, in effect, is organizing a collective self-defense. This is very important. We're organizing what we call the special marshals, who will have the authority to exercise what is the development of citizen's arrest. You know, there is such a thing as citizen's arrest. If somebody is trying to burgle your house, you have a right to arrest him and deal with him. The same thing. Somebody is trying to kill you on the road, you have a right to deal with that person. Unpaid people who are taking their own lives into their own hands. I think that should be the expression. Taking your life in your own hands, not taking the law into your own hands.
So now we're upon the land which we shall be living off. And living off the land, of course, is both eating off the land and drinking off the land. You can see from these palm trees, there's another one over there, for palm wine. Two kinds of palm here. There's the raffia, which produces oguro. And there's a straight palm, which provides the ogidi, which is most people like, because very strong, very sweet, very creamy. Let's go and look at the yams. You won't see any tuber because it's not the season harvest for yams yet, but at least you'll see the tendrils. I think that's important. And of course, maize, you know maize, and cocoyam. And then more mint, that is a whole field of mint. Don't ask me what I'm going to do with it. I just asked them to plant some doing 20, you know.
When I earn a little money, I put it in here, and it grows. This thing will not be ready, you know. Number one, I'm broke. But the foundation itself will be launched in June this year. After that, it'll be a question of raising funds to maintain the place. The plan is that resident artists will actually live on the farm. I'm not a farmer, by the way, but I have people who help me. And we had a marvelous harvest of yam and cocoyam and tomatoes and things like that. But that's not my department. I'm really a hunter. And if I have guests here, I hope to be able to get them their meat. Some of the bush has been left as natural as possible so as to keep the animals quite happy until I'm ready to deal with them.
Yes, I've been watching them. I've been seeing their hoof marks, and one of these days I'll get around to them. But I want to encourage them to stay here and be at home, so we can knock them off one by one for the occasional dinner.
It was a different kind of relationship with the forest in Abeokuta from what it was in Ishara. In Ishara, I spoke about even the whole mythology, or in some cases, the reality of the wood spirits, whom I described as gourmets and demons, etc.
But you know, for people, gourmets are very, very realistic beings.
What are they?
Well, gourmets are supposed to be tree spirits, but they're not just nebulous, ethereal beings. They are physical beings who eat, drink, like you and me, who have hates, passions, and Fagon really imbued them with an extraordinary dimension of existence, but metaphysical as well as physical. No, I have not encountered any gourmets here. I don't know what I'll do if I met any. I haven't seen their footmarks around. All I see are the hoof marks of antelopes and grass cutters. You know, that's a big rodent, which is very delicious. And
so that's food for Ogun.
Well, beginning with me, Ogun can have his share after I've had mine. You know. Ogun suits my temperament. He's both god of the lyric, poetry. He's a hunter, of course, and I have that kind of inclination. He's very combative. He's in many ways a revolutionary. He's an organizer. He's a god of metallurgy, which removes some of those aspects, those rather technological aspects of Ogun, removes the kind of sentimentality which sometimes attaches to the whole issue of deities. In other words, Ogun, rather like Shango, who's become a god of electricity, Ogun is a god of our times. He's a god of all times, but is particularly a god of present-day Africa, embattled Africa, and for the African, who's constantly seeking ways of coping with a rather complex world, which is not essentially of his own making. Now, one of the fascinations of Ogun, in contrast to certain other deities, which you might call, which represent the idealistic aspects of humanity, or at least of human craving, is his very easy absorption of opposites. He's both destroyer and creator. He represents, therefore, what I call the creative flint, as much as the destructive essence of human beings.
It's my privilege to convey to you the warm congratulations of the Swedish Academy and to ask you to receive this year's Nobel Prize in Literature from the hand of His Majesty, the King.